Some people say that love is unconditional. But what happens when the person you trust the most turns their back on you? That's exactly what happened to me. I remember the day I married him like it was yesterday. My husband, my banker officer, the man I thought loved me more than anything in this world. He had a calm, commanding presence, the kind that made people listen, made people trust him. And I thought I was lucky, truly lucky, to have someone so brilliant, so successful, so untouchable. We met in college. He was the quiet genius in the finance department, always buried in his books, his mind sharp as a razor. I was drawn to him not just to his intelligence, but to the quiet kindness he showed to everyone around him. No one noticed the small gestures, the way he always made sure no one was left behind in group assignments, the way he smiled at the cashier with genuine warmth. I saw him in a way no one else did. By the time we graduated, I was completely in love, and he proposed to me in the most unexpected way at a little cafe by the river where we had studied together, on a rainy evening, the kind of rain that makes everything look like a dream. I said yes, of course. Our early married life was a dream. We had a small apartment in the city, just enough to make it cozy but luxurious enough to feel grown up. He worked long hours at the bank, but he always made time for me. We had dinners together, whispered conversations late at night, shared hopes, shared secrets, shared dreams. I believed nothing could come between us, but life has a cruel way of teaching you lessons you never wanted to learn. It started subtly. A missed dinner here, a phone call that lasted too long there. I told myself, it's just work. He's under pressure. He's helping clients, solving problems. It's his nature. And I believed it. I wanted to believe it. Then came the whispers. At first, it was just rumors among colleagues. Did you see him talking to that widow in the conference room? They say he's helping her with her finances, but he seems close. I brushed it off, thinking they were just jealous or imagining things. After all, he had always been a loyal, caring man, or at least I thought he was. But then I saw it with my own eyes. It was late one evening. I had returned from a meeting earlier than expected, hoping to surprise him with his favorite dinner. I opened the door to our apartment, and there they were. Him, laughing, holding hands with a woman I didn't know. She was older than me, elegant in her grief, a widow. Her eyes held sorrow, but there was something else there too, something I couldn't put my finger on, and in that moment, my world shattered. I confronted him. I asked him, voice trembling, "Who is she? Why are you here?" He looked at me, and the look in his eyes was not fear, not guilt. It was acceptance. He told me calmly, almost too calmly, that he had promised to support her, that he couldn't abandon her now, that he had to help raise her late husband's child, guide her through the financial struggles she faced, and just like that, he abandoned me. He didn't yell, didn't argue. He just left me standing in our apartment, in the half light of the kitchen, the smell of my favorite dinner still lingering in the air. He left me with nothing but memories, promises broken, and a heart that refused to stop breaking. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. And in that time, I realized something painful. I didn't just lose him. I lost my future, my dreams, my life as I knew it. Friends tried to console me. Family tried to offer advice. But nothing could fill the void he left behind. I tried to move on, of course. I threw myself into work, into hobbies, into anything that could distract me from the pain. but every time I saw him or heard his name, it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. And then the tragedy came. I don't like to talk about that night. The accident, the way everything went dark, the helplessness. But it ended one chapter of my life. And, unknowingly, it started another. When I woke up, I wasn't the same. Not just physically, but mentally, spiritually. I remembered everything: my life, my heartbreak, his betrayal. And in that moment, a fire ignited inside me. I vowed, silently, fiercely, that I would never be powerless again. That I would rise, not just to confront him, but to reclaim my life, my dignity, my happiness. That I would follow him, and he would see me not as the woman he left behind, but as someone he could never ignore, someone he could never take for granted again. Little did he know, the woman he abandoned was coming back, stronger, smarter, more beautiful, more unstoppable. I had no idea what the journey would entail, what challenges awaited me, what schemes I would have to endure, what risks I would take. But I knew one thing for certain: he would never see me the same way again. And so, my story began. Not with love, but with betrayal. Not with joy, but with heartbreak. Not with him, but without him. He abandoned me to raise a widow. But reborn, I was ready to follow him to the bank, and when he saw me, he would be shocked. I woke up to the same world, but I was no longer the same person. Everything I had lost, everything I had suffered, it was still mine to reclaim. When I opened my eyes, the world felt sharper, brighter, more intense. The pain of my past life was still there, etched deep in my heart, but alongside it was clarity. Everything, every betrayal, every tear, every heartbreak had a purpose now. I could feel it coursing through me, the fire of rebirth. I looked in the mirror and saw a reflection that was familiar, yet entirely different. The same eyes that had cried themselves dry were now burning with determination. The same lips that had whispered his name in sorrow were now pressed together in silent promise. I will rise. I will not be forgotten. I will be unstoppable. I sat up, taking in the sterile hospital room around me. Machines beeped softly, the sunlight streamed through the window, and I realized I had been given a second chance. Not everyone gets to come back. Not everyone gets to rewrite their story. But I had, and I would. The first thing I did was remember everything. Every detail of my past life: the warmth of our early love, the betrayal, the whispers of co-workers, the way he left without a word. I replayed it all, not to mourn, but to learn. I knew my first step had to be understanding him, understanding the man who could abandon me without a second thought. Where did he work now? What did he care about? Who did he spend his time with? These questions burned in my mind, demanding answers. Research became my obsession. I spent hours poring over his social media, bank announcements, colleagues' mentions, and financial news. Slowly, I pieced together the puzzle. He had transferred to a prestigious private bank, one of the top in the city. He had become a rising star, respected, admired, feared even. And that widow, she had her own small role in his world, but he was deeply attached to her, probably out of guilt or convenience. I smiled. This was perfect. I knew I couldn't just storm into his life again, not yet. I had to be careful. Subtlety, strategy, transformation, these would be my weapons. I would not be the naive, trusting woman he once knew. I would be the storm he never saw coming. The first step, reinvention. I needed to become someone unrecognizable, someone who could enter his world with confidence, with allure, with intelligence that rivaled his. I invested in my appearance, updated my wardrobe, worked on my posture, my speech, every detail that would make me commanding, irresistible, and untouchable. But it wasn't just physical. I sharpened my mind too. I studied finance, economics, and management. If I wanted to confront him in his world, the world of banks, power, and money, I had to be more than beautiful. I had to be formidable. As days turned into weeks, I felt the transformation taking root. The timid, heartbroken woman who once cried at his absence was gone. In her place stood a confident, poised, intelligent woman who could challenge anyone, especially him. But transformation alone was not enough. I had to plan. Every move I made had to be deliberate. I started mapping out how I would enter the bank, how I would interact with him, how I would reveal myself in a way that left him speechless. I imagined the moment he finally looked at me and realized who I was. The shock, the regret, the disbelief, it would be exquisite. I also reminded myself that this wasn't just about revenge. It was about closure, about taking back what was rightfully mine, my dignity, my life, my future. If he wanted to be with a widow out of guilt or convenience, fine. But he would see that I was no longer the one to be ignored, the one to be abandoned. Every day, I rehearsed in my mind how our encounter would go. I pictured him looking at me in the bank lobby, his calm, commanding presence faltering for the first time. I imagined the widow's subtle surprise, the colleagues whispering, and him realizing, too late, that he had underestimated me. And yet, beneath all the planning, beneath the fire of revenge, there was another feeling one I tried to suppress, the lingering ache of love. Even though he had abandoned me, even though he had shattered my world, a part of me still remembered the man I once adored. But I pushed it aside. I reminded myself, this wasn't about rekindling love. This was about showing him that he had lost something irreplaceable, that he had underestimated the woman he once thought he knew. With that resolve, I started preparing for the first step, entering his world. I took courses, built connections, polished my resume, and applied to banks. Not just any banks, but the bank where he had built his new life, the bank where he thought I would never reach him. Every day brought me closer. Every setback was a lesson. And slowly, the plan began to take shape in reality. I knew the moment I walked into that bank, dressed impeccably, with confidence radiating from every step, his world would shift. And when he saw me, I wanted him to remember everything. The laughter, the love, the betrayal. I wanted him to see me as the woman he abandoned, the woman who had risen from heartbreak, who had been reborn, and who could now stand taller than him in every way. But I also knew one thing. Patience was key. I couldn't rush. One wrong move, one hint that this was personal, and it would all fall apart. I had to be precise, elegant, strategic. And so, my rebirth was not just in body, but in mind, in heart, in spirit. I was no longer the woman he left behind. I was someone new, someone unstoppable, someone he would never forget. And the moment I would finally meet him again, the moment he would see me standing before him, confident, radiant, and untouchable, that moment would be unforgettable. I was reborn, and I was coming for him. To defeat someone, you first need to understand them. To confront a man like him, I had to know everything: his habits, his weaknesses, his world. I needed a plan that left nothing to chance. After weeks of preparation, I felt ready, not just physically, but mentally. But I knew transformation alone wouldn't be enough. I had to step into his world, but carefully, strategically. I had to understand him, the man who had abandoned me, the man I had once loved, the man I was about to shake to his core. I began with the basics. I followed him discreetly, not in a way that would alert him, of course, but enough to observe his routines. I learned which CFS he preferred, the precise timing of his meetings, even how he interacted with his colleagues. I watched him from a distance as he walked into the bank every morning, his posture straight, his expression composed, commanding respect from everyone he passed, and yet I noticed cracks, small subtle ones, a slight hesitation when talking to the widow, a fleeting expression of guilt when no one was watching, a distant glance that betrayed more than he intended. I smiled. I was starting to see the man behind the mask. The perfect banker, the calm officer, the man who seemed untouchable, was still human, still capable of mistakes, still capable of feeling. Next, I needed information. I couldn't just rely on observation. I started connecting with his colleagues indirectly. LinkedIn became my friend, as did professional networking events. I asked questions, subtly, pretending to be an aspiring banker seeking advice, showing interest in the industry. Everyone was polite, helpful, unsuspecting, and through their casual mentions, I began building a picture of his daily life, his influence in the bank, and the subtle ways he had woven himself into every corner of his professional world. And then, the widow. I learned more about her than I had expected. She was charming, but she had vulnerabilities, moments of uncertainty that she tried to hide behind her polite smiles. And he had become dependent on her, emotionally and practically. That's when I realized something critical. He had not abandoned me out of love for her. He had abandoned me because he thought he had to, out of guilt, obligation, or weakness. And that was my leverage. If I could enter his life with confidence, intelligence, and poise, he would see the stark contrast between the woman he left behind and the woman standing before him. I could manipulate perceptions, highlight my strength, and make him realize, not with words, but with actions, that he had lost someone irreplaceable. But I also knew this had to be subtle. A direct confrontation too early would ruin everything. I had to plan my approach carefully. The first encounter, the timing, the setting. I considered multiple scenarios. Meeting him in the lobby, being introduced as a new consultant, even orchestrating a corporate project that required his collaboration. Each option had risks, but also potential for maximum impact. I documented everything in a notebook, a private journal of strategy. Every detail, his routines, his expressions, the way he reacted to stress, the subtle gestures toward the widow, his favorite coffee, the way he held a pen when deep in thought. No detail was too small. Every observation was a piece of the puzzle I was assembling. Meanwhile, I honed my professional skills. I wasn't just going to look impressive. I had to be impressive. I took advanced courses in finance, risk management, and corporate strategy. I attended workshops, networked with industry insiders, and absorbed knowledge like a sponge. By the time I was ready to step into the bank, I wasn't just a transformed woman, I was a force to be reckoned with. And then came the day I finalized my plan. I would enter the bank not as a desperate woman seeking revenge, but as a competent professional, someone who could stand on equal footing with him. I would let him see me, hear me, notice me, and let the shock do the rest. But even as I meticulously craft my plan, I reminded myself of one rule: patience. No matter how tempting it was to confront him immediately, I had to wait for the perfect moment. One misstep, one sign of desperation, and everything would collapse. This was a game of precision, and I intended to win. I also prepared for contingencies. What if he didn't recognize me immediately? What if the widow became suspicious? What if my presence triggered unexpected consequences? I thought through every scenario, rehearsed dialogues in my mind, and refined my strategy repeatedly until every move was deliberate. And through it all, one thought kept me going. He would not see me coming. He would not recognize the woman he abandoned. And when he did, the shock, the realization, the regret, it would be unforgettable. I wasn't just planning a confrontation. I was planning a revelation. A storm disguised as a woman who had been left behind. And he had no idea it was coming. They say a woman can be forgotten, left behind, dismissed. But when she rises, she becomes unforgettable. The morning I walked into the bank, I felt every heartbeat echoing like a drum in my chest. But this time, it was different. There was no fear, no trembling, no doubt. This was my moment, the culmination of weeks of planning, transformation, and preparation. I looked at my reflection one last time in the lobby mirror before stepping inside. My hair fell perfectly around my shoulders. My makeup accentuated my sharp cheekbones and confident eyes. My tailored outfit exuded both elegance and authority. But the most important transformation wasn't external, it was internal. My posture, my gait, the way I held myself. Every step radiated strength. I was no longer the woman he had abandoned. I was someone he would never forget. The lobby buzzed with activity. Bank employees moved quickly. Clients discussed numbers. Executives hurried to meetings. And there he was, my husband. Calm, composed, the image of a successful banker, unaware that the past he had left behind was walking through the door. I studied him discreetly, noting every detail. His expression, perfectly neutral to the world, softened slightly as he noticed someone new entering the bank, a confident, poised woman, elegant and radiant. I could almost feel the subtle recognition stirring in his mind, though he didn't yet realize who I truly was. I took deliberate steps toward the receptionist, introducing myself professionally. Good morning. I'm here to speak with Mr. Husband's name regarding a consultancy project. My voice was calm, confident, unwavering. Every syllable was chosen carefully, every inflection precise. The receptionist checked her notes and smiled politely. Of course, please wait here. As I stood there, I felt his eyes on me. He was studying me now, his gaze lingering just a fraction too long to be casual. My heart quickened, not out of fear, but anticipation. This was exactly the reaction I wanted. When he finally approached, I held his gaze steadily. He looked at me, and for a split second, there was a flicker of recognition, an almost imperceptible hesitation in his otherwise perfect composure. But he masked it quickly, as he always did, with the calm, confident demeanor of a banker used to commanding respect. Good morning, he said, his voice steady, professional. But there was something beneath it, an undercurrent of curiosity, perhaps even unease. Good morning, I replied, smiling politely. Thank you for taking the time to meet me. He led me to his office, maintaining a professional distance. Yet I could feel the tension building. Every glance, every subtle movement, every carefully measured word was a dance of power, control, and hidden emotion. I noticed the widow's presence in the background, subtle, poised, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes betraying a flicker of unease. She was part of his world now, but I could already sense cracks forming. During our meeting, I spoke with intelligence and authority, discussing financial strategies, risk management, and investment opportunities. I could see him analyzing me, trying to place me in his memory. He didn't know yet that the woman sitting confidently in front of him was the same one he had abandoned, the one he had thought he could forget. Every word I spoke, every idea I presented, was deliberate. I wasn't just here to impress, I was here to remind him that I was irreplaceable, that I was strong, intelligent, and independent. And beneath it all, I let the tension simmer. I dropped subtle hints of familiarity, gestures, phrases, the way I held my pen, the tilt of my head, all carefully designed to evoke memories without revealing too much too soon. He shifted in his chair, his usual composure faltering just slightly. I could see it, he was unsettled, confused, intrigued. And I smiled inwardly. The plan was working. The recognition was stirring, and he didn't even realize it yet. After the meeting, I left the office gracefully, leaving him with questions he couldn't answer. The widow watched me leave, and I noticed the subtle tension in her posture. She was alert, cautious, sensing that I was more than I appeared to be. As I stepped out into the hallway, I allowed myself a private moment of satisfaction. The first step had been taken. The first impression had been made. He had seen me, studied me, felt the stirrings of recognition, and he had no idea what was coming next. I knew this was only the beginning. The bank was a stage, and I was learning every subtle cue, every reaction, every emotional twitch. I would use this knowledge to my advantage, to orchestrate encounters, to manipulate perceptions, to ensure that when the truth came out, it would hit him with the force of a storm. He thought he had left me behind, but he hadn't. And now, every move he made would be under my watchful eyes. That night, as I returned home, I reviewed everything in my mind, the way he had looked at me, the subtle tension in his posture, the flicker of recognition in his eyes. I was meticulous, strategic, and patient. I would not rush. I would not falter. I would wait for the perfect moment to reveal myself fully. And deep down, a part of me relished the thought of the shock, the disbelief, the regret he would feel. But I reminded myself that this was not about cruelty, it was about justice, about reclaiming what had been stolen, about proving that I was unstoppable. Every step I took from that moment on would be calculated, precise, and deliberate. I was no longer the woman he abandoned. I was a force of nature, reborn, unrecognizable and unstoppable, and the storm was only beginning. There's a moment when recognition hits, not fully, not yet, but enough to unsettle someone who thought they were untouchable. That moment had arrived. The next morning, I returned to the bank with a calm, purposeful stride. Today was not about meetings or presentations, it was about presence. Every step I took, every glance I cast, was calculated to leave an impression. As I walked through the lobby, I felt his eyes immediately. I could see the subtle hesitation in his posture, the slight shift in his expression, the way his hands tightened around his coffee cup. He was analyzing me again, trying to place me, but still unable to connect the dots. I allowed a faint, almost imperceptible smile to touch my lips. Just enough to spark curiosity, but not enough to reveal myself. I wanted him unsettled, intrigued, and off balance. The widow noticed me too. Her posture stiffened, her polite composure faltering just slightly. She tried to mask it, but I could see the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes lingered on me with suspicion. She sensed the storm I carried and perhaps feared it. I approached him casually, offering a friendly nod as if we were colleagues meeting for the first time. "Good morning," I said smoothly. "Good morning," he replied, but there was a flicker in his gaze. Recognition? Curiosity? Perhaps both. His professional calm wavered just a fraction, revealing the human beneath the banker's mask. I allowed myself to linger in that brief exchange, letting the tension build. Every second I stood near him, the air seemed to shift. He was trying to place me, to recall a memory he couldn't yet name, while I remained perfectly in control, observing every micro-expression, every subtle reaction. Later, in a meeting room with other colleagues, I made my first subtle move. I dropped phrases, anecdotes, and gestures from my past life, things only he could possibly recognize. A reference to a project we had once discussed years ago, a shared phrase he had used in our early conversations. Each hint was carefully calculated, enough to stir his memory without revealing the full truth. And it worked. I saw it in his eyes, the flicker of doubt, the quick blink, the tightening of his jaw. He remembered something, but not yet everything. The suspense was building, and I could feel it. The widow beside him sensed it too. Her eyes widened slightly at one of my subtle remarks, a silent acknowledgement that something was different about me. I watched him closely during lunch, noting the way he stole glances, the way he unconsciously adjusted his tie, the faint tension in his posture. He was unsettled, distracted, vulnerable, and I relished it not out of cruelty, but out of justice. He had abandoned me, and now, for the first time, he was beginning to feel the uncertainty I had endured. But it wasn't just him. The bank itself became a stage for subtle maneuvers. I positioned myself in projects that intersected with his responsibilities, joined committees that required collaboration, and made professional moves designed to place us in proximity. Every encounter was deliberate, every interaction carefully orchestrated to stir recognition, tension, and intrigue. During a brief moment alone, he approached me quietly. "Do we know each other from somewhere?" His voice was calm but laced with confusion and hesitation. I smiled faintly, letting just enough ambiguity linger. "Perhaps," I replied, letting my tone suggest familiarity without confirming anything. His eyes searched mine, and I could feel the flicker of memory trying to surface. But he couldn't quite grasp it yet. The suspense, the curiosity, the subtle unease, it was exactly where I wanted him. I left him with that uncertainty, returning to my work with perfect composure. Every move was deliberate, a calculated step toward the moment when the full revelation would unfold. I could feel the widow's suspicion growing, the colleagues whispering quietly, the energy in the office shifting subtly as if anticipating something monumental. And in that tension, in that controlled chaos of unspoken recognition, I felt a surge of power. This wasn't just about him realizing who I was, it was about asserting my presence, my intelligence, my independence. I was no longer a woman abandoned. I was a woman commanding attention, respect, and influence. The first hints were enough to unsettle him. The storm was approaching, and there was no turning back. By the end of the day, I had planted enough seeds of curiosity, doubt, and subtle recognition. He was thinking about me constantly, replaying our encounters, analyzing my words, my gestures, my presence. And the widow, she was increasingly aware that I was a force to be reckoned with. As I walked out of the bank, I allowed myself a quiet smile. The first encounter was complete. The tension was building, and the next step, where recognition would become undeniable, was on the horizon. I had played my first hand perfectly, and the game had only just begun. He thought he could leave the past behind. He thought he could bury me under obligations and time. But memories have a way of creeping back, and guilt has a way of finding its mark. It didn't take long for him to start noticing the cracks. The brief exchanges, the fleeting smiles. The way I lingered near projects, he oversaw each detail, gnawed at him, making him question what he thought he knew. He was precise, analytical, a man who thrived on control. But I had become unpredictable, subtle, and impossible to place. He couldn't figure me out, and that was exactly the point. I watched him during meetings, observing the subtle changes in his demeanor. The way he paused mid-sentence, the slight tightening of his lips, the sudden distraction at seemingly trivial moments. He was unsettled, and every hint of unease thrilled me, not because I wanted to hurt him, but because it meant he was feeling a fraction of the turmoil he had caused me. The widow, too, began to sense the shift. Her polite composure faltered more often, subtle glances in my direction betraying a hint of suspicion and insecurity. She had once assumed she was untouchable in his world, but my presence was a quiet reminder that nothing, not even guilt, could replace the woman he had abandoned. One afternoon, I orchestrated a situation that forced us to collaborate on a high-stakes project. It was a calculated move, a scenario where I could demonstrate not only my intelligence and competence, but also my calm under pressure. As we worked side by side, he glanced at me repeatedly. His mind raced, trying to place the familiarity, the confidence, the poise. He noticed the way I approached problems, the clarity of my reasoning, the subtle gestures. Everything was so familiar yet so impossibly different. Who is she? He must have asked himself countless times. And I let him wonder. I let him feel the tension, the guilt, the confusion. During a brief break, he finally spoke, his voice low, uncertain. There's something about you. It feels like I should know you. I smiled softly, allowing just the smallest hint of warmth. Perhaps, I said ambiguously, keeping my tone professional yet intimate enough to spark the memory he desperately tried to recall. His reaction was immediate but subtle. A quick intake of breath, a brief widening of the eyes, a flicker of recognition, enough to make my heart race, not with fear, but with satisfaction. Every interaction, every glance, every word became a tool. I wasn't cruel, I was strategic. He had abandoned me, and now he was facing the consequences of underestimating the woman he had left behind. The emotional tension built steadily over days. He was increasingly distracted, increasingly thoughtful, increasingly aware of the void I had left in his life, a void that no widow, no work, no status could fill. And I remained the calm eye of the storm, observing, waiting, preparing for the moment when recognition would be undeniable. I also discovered subtle vulnerabilities in him I hadn't noticed before: his guilt, his fleeting indecisiveness, the cracks in his otherwise perfect control. Each moment was an opportunity to deepen his realization, to make him question the choices he had made, and to remind him that I was no longer the woman he could leave behind without consequence. At the same time, I maintained my professional integrity. I didn't humiliate him. I didn't confront him openly, at least, not yet. I allowed his own mind to do the work, letting him piece together the memories, the emotions, the recognition. It was more powerful than any confrontation I could stage. And then came the moment I had been waiting for, a subtle slip, a reaction that revealed the depth of his inner turmoil. A shared anecdote, a gesture I made unconsciously, and suddenly he paused. His hand froze mid-note, his pen hovering, his eyes searching mine as if seeking confirmation of something he couldn't yet name. That moment was exquisite. It wasn't just recognition, it was realization. And with realization came guilt, a deep, uncomfortable awareness that he had made a mistake he could no longer ignore. I left him with that tension unresolved, returning to my work with the same calm, deliberate composure I had cultivated. I allowed the silence, the uncertainty, the unspoken emotions to linger, knowing that each day would chip away at the fort he had built, leaving him vulnerable, introspective, and human. He thought he had control. He thought he could bury the past. But the past has a way of finding those who try to ignore it. By the end of that week, I had successfully unsettled him without a single word of accusation, without a single overt act of revenge. The storm was building, slow but unstoppable, and I could see it, the subtle cracks in his composure, the fleeting moments of doubt, the unspoken acknowledgement that he had underestimated me. It was more satisfying than I could have imagined. Not because I wanted him to suffer, but because justice, finally, was taking shape. He had left me powerless once. Now, he was powerless in a different way, aware, unsettled, and increasingly aware that the woman he had abandoned was no longer someone he could control, dismiss, or ignore. And as I walked out of the bank that evening, I allowed myself a quiet moment of triumph. The emotional tension, the guilt, the simmering realization it was all part of the plan. And the next phase, where his recognition would become undeniable, was drawing ever closer. I wasn't just returning to his world, I was reshaping it. And he would never see me the same way again. The moment of truth doesn't always come with shouts or tears. Sometimes it comes with silence, with a glance, with subtle hints that force someone to face what they've lost. It was a late afternoon at the bank, the golden light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the polished marble floor, the perfect setting for a revelation, subtle yet undeniable. I walked into his office as usual, poised, confident, radiating calm authority. He looked up from his paperwork, and I saw it immediately, the flicker of recognition in his eyes. His jaw tightened, a subtle tension in his shoulders, his calm facade cracking just slightly. He knew something was different. "Good afternoon," I said, voice smooth, controlled, yet carrying just enough warmth to spark memory. He nodded, swallowing hard. "Good afternoon. You." His voice faltered on the last word, betraying confusion. I allowed a small, deliberate pause, letting the moment stretch, letting the suspense build. "Do I look familiar?" I asked casually, leaning slightly against the desk, maintaining perfect composure. His eyes widened, scanning my face, searching for an anchor, a clue, anything that would place me in the depths of his memory. I don't know," he admitted, his voice a mixture of disbelief and hesitation. I smiled faintly, letting my next words drip with subtle meaning. "Perhaps you should remember. The woman you once promised to love, the woman you left behind." His eyes froze, recognition finally surfacing. The pause stretched, heavy with emotion. I saw the shift of surprise, the shock, the beginning of regret flickering across his features. "You," he breathed, the single word loaded with confusion and guilt. "It can't be." "It is," I replied softly, calmly, my gaze steady. "I'm the one you abandoned to help someone else. The one you thought you could forget." For a moment, the office was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. His mind raced, connecting pieces, replaying memories, feeling the weight of his choices for the first time. The widow, who had entered the room quietly to deliver documents, froze mid-step. Her composed expression faltered as she realized something was happening, something she hadn't anticipated. Her eyes darted between us, tension rising, as she sensed the storm I had brought into their carefully structured world. He began, his voice faltering. I thought I was doing the right thing. You abandoned me, I interrupted, my voice calm but firm, cutting through his excuses. Not because you loved her more, not because you cared for me less, but because you thought you had to, because you believed guilt was stronger than love. And now, I let my words hang, heavy with meaning. You see what you lost. He looked at me, eyes wide, struggling to find words. His usual composure, the confidence that had made him untouchable in his career, was gone. All that remained was a man confronting the consequences of his choices. The widow stepped back, uncertainty flickering across her face. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that she was a participant in a story far larger than her own, a story in which she was not the center. He started again, voice trembling. I didn't mean. I shook my head slightly, cutting him off gently, but firmly. It doesn't matter what you meant. What matters is that you abandoned someone who loved you, someone who believed in you. And now, I'm here, not to plead, not to cry, not to beg, but to show you what it means to lose someone who cannot be replaced. His chest rose and fell rapidly. The conflict in his eyes, guilt, regret, disbelief, and an emerging respect, was exactly what I had anticipated. He realized the depth of my transformation, the strength I had gained, the intelligence I had cultivated, and he knew, deep down, that he had underestimated me. I allowed a small, controlled smile. I'm not the same woman you left behind. I've grown, I've learned, I've rebuilt myself, and I am unstoppable. He opened his mouth, searching for words, but none came. The silence was heavy, deliberate, a mirror reflecting his failure, his loss, and his human vulnerability. I stepped back, maintaining distance, letting the weight of my presence sink in fully. Remember this moment, I said softly, not as the woman who begged for your attention, but as the woman who chose herself. The woman who rose from heartbreak and betrayal. The woman who became unstoppable. The widow, sensing the magnitude of the moment, quietly excused herself, leaving the two of us alone. And in that solitude, the full force of recognition hit him. He understood finally, painfully, that he had lost something irreplaceable. I turned to leave, letting the suspense linger, letting him process the revelation fully. Every step I took echoed through the room, a reminder of my transformation, my strength, and the storm I had become. As I walked out, I allowed myself a private smile. The confrontation was not explosive, not filled with shouting or drama. It was controlled, precise, and infinitely more powerful because it left him with only questions, regret, and the undeniable truth of what he had lost. He thought he had control over me, over our past, over the choices we made. But control is an illusion, and now he had none. He thought he had left the past behind. But the past has a way of finding its way back, unannounced, unstoppable, and sometimes devastating. After our subtle but powerful confrontation, the atmosphere at the bank shifted. It wasn't dramatic, loud, or overt, but there was a current, an invisible tension that tugged at everyone who entered the space. The whispers of colleagues, the distracted glances, the way he moved through his day, all were evidence of a subtle storm that had begun. He avoided me at first, trying to regain control, trying to bury the questions that had started to surface in his mind. But in a place where proximity and collaboration were unavoidable, that strategy failed. Every project, every meeting, every shared glance was now charged with an undercurrent of emotion he could not control. The widow, too, became more cautious. She had initially assumed that her presence alone would cement her place in his world, that I was irrelevant. But my controlled, confident demeanor began to make her nervous. She noticed the subtle way he reacted to me, the way his eyes followed me without conscious thought, and the occasional hesitation in his tone when addressing me. It was delightful. I maintained my professionalism, never openly confronting him again, at least not yet. Instead, I allowed the tension to simmer, growing stronger with each interaction. I dropped small, familiar phrases during meetings, allusions to shared experiences, gestures that only he would recognize. Each subtle move pushed him closer to the edge of realization. During one particularly high-stakes meeting, I noticed him faltering. A crucial financial decision hung in the balance, and his usual clarity wavered. He was distracted not by the project, not by the numbers, but by the presence of the woman he had abandoned. His mind raced, trying to separate memory from reality, trying to dismiss the emotion stirring within him. I offered a suggestion, confident, precise, and elegantly delivered. He looked at me, a mix of surprise and respect in his eyes. And in that moment, I saw the first glimpse of understanding, of recognition, of guilt entwined with admiration. The widow's attempts to maintain control began to crumble. She tried to dominate discussions, assert her influence, and keep him focused on her. But he was increasingly aware of the contrast. My intelligence, my composure, my undeniable presence. I wasn't just a woman from his past. I was a force that could no longer be ignored. I began orchestrating moments of subtle disruption, a project that required joint collaboration, a report that only I could analyze efficiently, a presentation that showcased my skills directly alongside his. Every interaction was intentional, every detail calculated to highlight my growth, my competence, and my independence, and he felt it. Every glance, every hesitation, every moment of doubt reminded him of what he had lost, of the woman he had abandoned, of the life he had walked away from. One evening, late in the office, he approached me quietly. His expression was tense, conflicted, and unguarded in a way I had never seen before. I can't stop thinking about you, he admitted, voice low and tight. I keep trying to understand. How did this happen? How are you like this? I allowed a small, calm smile, letting the truth hang between us. I grew, I said simply. I rebuilt myself. I became the woman you abandoned. And now, I exist on my own terms. He looked at me speechless, struggling to reconcile the memory of the woman he once knew with the woman standing before him. The contrast was jarring, painful, undeniable. He started again, but no words could capture the storm of guilt, admiration, and regret building inside him. I shook my head gently. This isn't about punishment, I said softly. It's about recognition. It's about showing you the consequences of abandoning someone who loved you, someone who trusted you, someone who believed in you. The tension between us was almost tangible, charged with history, emotion, and unspoken truths. The widow, sensing the depth of the connection between us, grew increasingly uneasy, her carefully maintained composure cracking under the pressure of our subtle power struggle. I stepped away, leaving him to process the encounter, letting the silence speak louder than words. Each step I took reinforced my presence, my independence, my transformation. And in that moment, I realized something profound. The power wasn't in confrontation or revenge, it was in the controlled unfolding of truth, in letting him discover the consequences of his actions without interference. He thought he had control. over everything, over me, over his life, over the choices he made. But control is an illusion, and now he was learning that the past he abandoned could no longer be ignored. By the end of that week, the bank had changed. Not visibly, not dramatically, but subtly, invisibly. Every interaction, every glance, every conversation carried tension, awareness, and an undercurrent of emotion. And at the center of it all, I stood calmly, confidently, and undeniably. The storm was rising. The emotional turmoil was building. And the moment when everything would come to a head, the moment when recognition, guilt, and undeniable truth collided, was drawing ever closer. I wasn't just back in his world. I was the force that would redefine it, reshape it, and make him see the woman he had lost in a way he could never ignore. Sometimes the final blow isn't loud. It isn't violent. It's deliberate, precise, and unstoppable. And that was the power I had finally harnessed. Weeks had passed since my initial return to the bank. The subtle tension I had cultivated had now blossomed into a tangible force. He couldn't ignore me, the widow couldn't dismiss me, and the office itself seemed to revolve, at least momentarily, around my presence. I had planned my next moves meticulously, subtle, strategic, and precise. It wasn't about chaos or confrontation, it was about assertion, about taking control in ways that left no doubt of my transformation, my intelligence, and my power. The first decisive move was public. During a high-stakes board meeting, I presented a solution to a financial dilemma that had stumped even the most senior executives. Every word was measured, every slide, every diagram, perfectly executed. He watched me from across the table, disbelief flickering in his eyes. This wasn't the woman he had abandoned. This was someone untouchable, someone brilliant, someone who had turned heartbreak into mastery. When I finished, the room erupted in polite applause. The widow, sitting beside him, realized she had underestimated me. Her influence waned with every acknowledgement I received, with every nod of approval from colleagues, and with every subtle glance of admiration directed my way. He, however, remained silent, staring at me with a mixture of awe, guilt, and a dawning fear. For the first time, he wasn't in control. I was, and I knew it. After the meeting, he pulled me aside quietly, away from the crowd. You've changed, he said, voice low, almost reverent. I didn't expect this. You should have, I interrupted gently, my tone calm but commanding. You left me behind, assumed I couldn't rise. But here I am. I'm unstoppable now. And it's not just about success, it's about showing you the woman you abandoned. He swallowed hard, his usual composure faltering. I never thought. Stop, I said, holding up a hand. Don't speak yet. Watch, listen, understand. The consequences of leaving someone who believed in you aren't always immediate, but they're inevitable. And this is your reckoning. The widow had been observing from a distance. Her attempts to assert influence, to maintain her position, were slipping. I could see it, the subtle tightening of her posture, the distracted glances, the unease in her expression. She sensed, even if she didn't understand, that the dynamics had shifted irreversibly. I wasn't just reclaiming my place in his world. I was asserting dominance over the narrative, rewriting the rules, and ensuring that my presence could no longer be ignored or minimized. That evening, I orchestrated another subtle but decisive move. A private meeting, arranged under the guise of professional collaboration, placed us alone once more. I allowed the tension to build, letting him feel the weight of what he had lost, the consequences of underestimating me, and the undeniable contrast between the woman I had become and the one he had abandoned. "You," he began, voice trembling with suppressed emotion. I can't believe it's you." I smiled faintly, letting the recognition settle. "Believe it. This is who I am now. Not because of you, not because of anyone, but because of me. I survived, I grew, I conquered. And now, you must confront the reality that the woman you left behind is no longer powerless." He reached out, as if to touch my hand, to seek connection, to seek forgiveness. But I stepped back, maintaining control, leaving the reach unfulfilled. The act itself, simple yet deliberate, sent a clear message. I determined the terms of engagement now. I held the power, the choice, and the narrative. That night, as I left the bank, I allowed myself a quiet smile. The turning point was complete. I had reclaimed control, asserted my presence, and forced him to confront the consequences of his past actions. The storm was no longer approaching, it had arrived. He thought he could escape the consequences of abandoning me. He thought he could maintain control. But control is an illusion, and now I held it firmly in my hands. The next steps were clear. Further deepen the tension between him, me, and the widow. Then begin the emotional climax where decisions must be made, and then prepare the stage for a final revelation that leaves no room for doubt. By the time the next day arrived, the bank was buzzing not with numbers or business alone, but with subtle whispers, glances, and the undeniable presence of someone who had changed the game entirely. And at the center of it all, I stood unshakable, unmovable, and unstoppable. Some truths cannot be delayed. Some realizations cannot be denied. And some hearts, once awakened, demand acknowledgement. The bank was unusually quiet that morning, the hum of computers and faint chatter masking the tension that hovered between us. I walked in with my usual calm, controlled composure, but beneath the surface, anticipation pulsed like a heartbeat. Today, the next chapter would unfold. He was at his desk, papers scattered, eyes darting over documents without focus. I could see it, the mental wrestling, the guilt, the admiration, the regret. He had spent weeks processing the storm I brought into his life, but today, confrontation was inevitable. I approached him deliberately, stopping a few steps away. The widow, as usual, hovered nearby, unaware of the depth of the moment about to strike. He looked up, voice trembling slightly. I don't understand. How did this happen? How are you like this?" I held his gaze, letting the truth linger in the space between us. "I survived," I said softly, "because I had to. I rebuilt myself, piece by piece, day by day, while you abandoned me for what you thought was duty, obligation, or convenience. And now," I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in, "I am here, stronger than ever, independent, unstoppable, and I am the truth you can no longer ignore." He swallowed hard, reaching out as if to bridge the gap between the past and the present. But I stepped back, maintaining control, letting him feel the absence that his choices had created. "I wanted to forgive you," he admitted quietly, his voice low, laden with guilt. "I thought maybe we could. But I see now that I was wrong. I thought I could replace what I left behind. But I can't." I studied him carefully. The emotion in his eyes was raw, vulnerable, and revealing far more than any words could convey. And I realized that his acknowledgement, though delayed, was exactly what I had orchestrated. "I am not here for your forgiveness," I replied calmly. I am here to reclaim my life, my dignity, and my power. I am here to show that abandoning someone does not erase their worth or their future. And you must live with the truth of what you lost. He flinched slightly at the words, the weight of them settling over him like an invisible hand. The widow looked on, realization dawning that the dynamics she had assumed she controlled were slipping away irreversibly. Then came the critical moment, the confession that could change everything. I loved you, he admitted, voice trembling. Even when I left, I never stopped caring. But I didn't know how to fix it. I made the wrong choices and I allowed the pause to linger, letting his guilt, regret, and confession settle fully. I know, I said softly, and that's why I am here. Not to punish you, not to plead with you, but to show you the consequences, to ensure that the choices you made are understood, acknowledged, and felt. He sank into his chair, the weight of his emotions overwhelming him. For the first time, the confident, composed banker was simply a man, vulnerable, flawed, and human. The widow stepped back, unsure how to respond. Her influence had been eroding steadily, and the undeniable connection, history, and tension between us overshadowed her presence. I took a step closer, measured, deliberate, allowing the power of my presence to convey more than words ever could. I have choices to make too, I said calmly. I can forgive, I can move on, or I can reclaim the life I deserve without you. The decision is mine, and I choose me. He looked up, hope and desperation flickering in his eyes. I can make it right. I'll do anything. I shook my head, letting the statement hang incomplete. Some things cannot be undone, I said softly. Some moments, some betrayals, some abandonments, they leave marks. And those marks have shaped me into who I am now. Strong, unstoppable, independent. He finally understood not just my transformation, but the depth of my strength, the power of resilience, and the consequences of leaving me behind. He had lost control, and I had claimed it fully, not through manipulation, but through presence, intelligence, and unwavering dignity. The widow, witnessing this exchange, realized the inevitability of her own diminishing influence. She could see the truth, the authenticity, and the undeniable bond that history had forged between us. And she knew, finally, that she could not compete with what was real. As I turned to leave, I allowed one last glance back, calm, composed, triumphant, yet graceful. Remember this moment, I said softly, not as the woman you abandoned, but as the woman who chose herself, who reclaimed her life, and who will never be overlooked again. He watched me go, the mixture of admiration, guilt, regret, and longing reflecting in his eyes. He knew that the woman before him was not the one he had left, and that realization was both devastating and undeniable. And in that silence, that pause, the emotional climax reached its peak. The power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my strength, and he, along with everyone around him, was forced to confront the truth of what he had lost. I wasn't just back in his world. I was the force that redefined it, reshaped it, and proved that the woman he abandoned was unstoppable. The power of choice is the ultimate liberation. And in the end, it's not about proving someone wrong, it's about proving yourself right. The days that followed the emotional confrontation were quiet yet charged with a new energy. The office seemed to pulse with awareness not of gossip or politics, but of someone who had rewritten the rules of engagement. I moved through the space confidently, every glance, every nod, every interaction reinforcing the transformation I had undergone. He approached me one morning, hesitantly, eyes filled with an unusual mix of respect, guilt, and longing. I don't want to lose you again," he said quietly. I studied him, seeing the depth of his realization and the weight of his regret. But I also recognized something far more important: my own strength, independence, and clarity. The choice was no longer about proving him wrong. It was about affirming my own worth and ensuring that my life moved forward on my terms. "You already lost me once," I replied calmly, voice steady, but carrying authority. "I won't let that happen again, not because of fear, but because I choose me. Always." He swallowed hard, the mix of emotions in his eyes deepening. For the first time, he truly understood that love, respect, and trust are earned, not demanded, not assumed. And I had earned mine through resilience, intelligence, and unwavering dignity. The widow, too, had begun to retreat, her attempts to assert control now futile against the undeniable reality of my presence and power. She could sense its subtle, unshakable authority, and she knew she could not compete with history, transformation, and truth. I made my final moves deliberate and precise. I collaborated with him professionally, yes, but on my terms. I engaged in conversations, negotiations, and decisions that demonstrated competence, confidence, and independence. Each interaction reinforced the truth that I was no longer someone who could be abandoned, dismissed, or overlooked. One afternoon, he asked to speak privately again. The office was quiet, sun filtering through the windows, casting a warm glow over the space. He looked at me, eyes steady now, voice calm but vulnerable. "I want to make things right," he said softly. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I need to know if there's a way forward." Together, I paused, considering the words carefully. My mind raced through memories of heartbreak, betrayal, and resilience. But I also recognized something crucial. Love is not about desperation or control. It's about choice, respect, and alignment of hearts. I began, voice measured. "I appreciate your acknowledgement, your realization, and your sincerity. But this isn't about reuniting out of guilt or obligation. It's about recognizing who I am and what I deserve. And right now, what I deserve is someone who values me fully, without hesitation, without compromise." He nodded slowly, understanding for the first time that love cannot be forced and respect cannot be assumed. The humility, clarity, and wisdom in my words left a lasting impact on him, on the widow, and on everyone who witnessed the subtle transformation. Then came my final decision. I would not return to the life of abandonment and uncertainty. I would not be drawn back into a past where I had been left powerless. Instead, I chose myself, my growth, my independence, and my future. "I've made my choice," I said softly, but firmly. "I am choosing me. I am choosing the life I've fought to rebuild." I hope you understand that this is not rejection, it's affirmation. I am unstoppable, and I will not let the past define me anymore. He looked at me, a mixture of admiration, sorrow, and acceptance in his eyes. The widow, witnessing this, realized the magnitude of my decision and the inevitability of my path. All pretenses, all assumptions, all attempts at control, they were gone. I left the office that evening with a quiet, triumphant smile. The storm had passed, but the lessons, the transformation, and the power I had reclaimed remained. I had not only confronted the man who abandoned me, but had also asserted my independence, reshaped my life, and emerged stronger than ever. I didn't need him to apologize, to beg, or to reconcile. I only needed to claim my power, and I did. The woman he abandoned was gone. In her place stood someone unstoppable. The past may shape us, but it does not define us. The choices we make today carve the path of our future. And sometimes, the greatest victory is choosing yourself. Weeks had passed since the emotional climax at the bank. The office had regained its rhythm, but the dynamics had permanently shifted. Colleagues spoke in hushed tones about the woman who had returned from abandonment, not just unbroken, but stronger, wiser, and unstoppable. I walked through the halls confidently, aware of the subtle acknowledgement in every glance, the respect in every nod. My presence was no longer merely noticed, it was felt. I had not returned for revenge, nor to reclaim what was lost. I had returned to claim myself, my power, and my future. He remained professional, cautious, and respectful. The man who had once abandoned me now understood, fully, that some lessons could not be undone, and some hearts could not be taken for granted. He had learned humility, respect, and the undeniable value of the woman he had left behind. The widow had quietly exited the scene, her influence diminished, her role in his life reduced to a distant memory. The tension she once wielded was replaced by recognition of the truth she could not change. I had grown, I had triumphed, and I was unstoppable. In my personal life, I embraced independence fully. I pursued opportunities, nurtured friendships, and immersed myself in projects that reflected my intelligence, creativity, and resilience. Every success, every achievement, every small victory was a reminder of the journey I had survived and conquered. One evening, standing on the balcony of my apartment, I reflected on the journey, the heartbreak, the abandonment, the rebirth, and the reclamation of my life. I realized that my story was not just about him or the choices he had made. It was about me, my strength, my growth, and the power of self-respect. I thought about the man who had abandoned me, now transformed by his own guilt and realization. I did not feel anger or desire for reconciliation. I felt gratitude for the lessons learned, the resilience gained, and the woman I had become. The woman I was is gone. In her place stands someone unstoppable, someone unafraid, someone free. And that is the greatest triumph of all. I sent one last message to him, not of anger, not of reproach, but of closure. I have chosen my life. I hope you choose yours with wisdom and respect. We both move forward, changed, wiser and stronger. He read it, paused, and for the first time, truly understood the depth of the journey I had undertaken. Respect, admiration, and humility reflected in his response, unspoken but deeply felt. The days that followed were filled with new beginnings. I traveled, pursued passions, and built relationships rooted in mutual respect and love. My life was no longer defined by abandonment but by triumph, by independence, and by the unshakable strength of my character. Even when I occasionally thought of him, it was not with longing or regret. It was with clarity and understanding of the past, acceptance of the journey, and appreciation for the growth it had inspired. In the end, the story was not about revenge, nor about heartbreak. It was about transformation, empowerment, and the reclaiming of one's life. It was about standing tall, unshakable, and unstoppable in the face of betrayal. And as I looked out over the city skyline, the lights twinkling like stars, I smiled. I had risen from heartbreak, rebuilt my life, and claimed the ultimate victory, the victory of self-respect, independence, and unstoppable strength. This is my life, my choices, my power, and nothing, no one, can ever take that away. Thanks for watching. Hoped you liked it. If you watched till the end, please comment love so that we could understand you were with us till the end. As well as, please let us know, where are you watching from? Before leaving, please hit the subscribe button, comment your thought, and share with your nearest and dearest one. See you in the next one. Until to the next one, spread love.